What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to be giving you a review for Thor Love and Thunder. So I just got back from seeing it, and I honestly don't know how to talk about this movie because I had such an incredible time watching it. Like, I really thought this was a really fun movie all around, but I have so many issues with it that I'm having trouble deciding if I think it was a good or a bad movie. Definitely not a bad movie, but I have trouble finding where it fits in between that, I guess. I'm going to be really thinking about it as we do this review, and I really sat down, wrote a bunch of stuff for the positives and negatives, and I have a conclusion now. I have a solid rating that I think works for this film, but at the same time, I don't know. It might honestly change after a few days after I rewatch it or whatever. It probably will shift over time. But this is just the rating I'm going to have for now because I gotta do this review. But I really don't know how to talk about this movie because there's just so much about it that I'm just mixed on. This is going to be a spoiler-free review because I know a lot of people probably haven't seen it yet. There are some spoiler-type stuff in the movie that would definitely be spoiling big parts of it, so I'm going to keep all that out of the video until the very end. So we're going to do a little chunk at the end after we go over the positives and negatives, and I'll talk about spoilers and how my thoughts on the spoilery stuff. And so I'll make sure to warn you guys when we get to that, but let's start off with the positives of Thor Love and Thunder. Like I said in the beginning, one of the best things about this movie is it is very fun. I mean, this is of course coming after Thor Ragnarok. Taika Waititi obviously knows what he's doing in terms of just making a very fun movie that is going to be really fun for like the family. Like, everyone's just going to have a good time seeing it. No one's going to be bored out of their minds. No one's going to fall asleep. You know, grandpa's not going to pass out over there. Like, they're going to all have a good time. They're going to be immersed in the story for the hour and 50-minute runtime. It's a very short movie. It's one of the shorter MCU movies, actually. So it's not going to be overstaying its welcome for anyone. I think everyone's going to be enjoying it pretty much all the way through. But are they going to be sitting there thinking it's the best story they've ever seen or even a decent story? That's kind of debatable, and kind of the problems that this movie really has is that when you really think about it, that's when it starts to be not as good as it could be. But if you're just there to watch a movie and not really give a shit, you're probably going to enjoy your time. And to be fair, that is most movie viewers, which is why most people are probably going to like this movie. Visually, the movie is really great, which has been kind of a pattern with recent MCU movies I've noticed in Phase 4, is that the colors are getting a lot better. Like, we saw it in Shang-Chi, we saw it in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, even Spider-Man Homecoming had pretty good colors here and there. And this movie as well, like, it's actually kind of vibrant, the contrast is there. A lot of MCU films before really didn't have that, and I think they probably heard people's criticisms about that, and I think that's why they're making them more colorful and more vibrant. And yeah, there's a lot of cool shots, a lot of cool scenes that just visually look really cool to look at. There's a whole sequence where they go to this one planet and it's like black and white, and I'm not going to spoil too much about the scene in particular, but it is really cool the way they use color in this scene in particular, and it was just nice to see. It's a nice movie to look at. But in terms of CGI, there's actually some moments where I feel like the CGI was kind of off for Marvel standards. There was one in particular that just looked really goofy. One little thing where like the kid was like talking to Thor through like this vision thing, and he had like his head just kind of popped up in the middle of nowhere, and it was like the effect around it just looked really shit for Marvel standards. But that's like my only, you know, complaint in that regards. In terms of visuals, it was a really good looking movie pretty much all throughout the film. Thor's main arc in this movie is actually pretty good. I mean, he's been kind of going on an arc for quite some time now, especially ever since Ragnarok. And it's mainly just about finding himself and trying to open up his heart and not closing it off like he did to Jane and like he did to a lot of other people in his life, because he was just afraid of losing people, because he kept obviously losing people in his life. He's lost more than most people have within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think his story here was pretty good. His connection to Jane here and how they developed their relationship, I actually enjoyed it. That was probably one of the better things about the movie, was their relationship, which I didn't think I would like it that much because she hasn't been there for so long, and it's kind of weird to just see her randomly come back. But the chemistry was still there, and it worked. It worked. It was actually kind of enjoyable, and I think it did a lot for his character for what they do, especially towards the end of this movie. Now, this is not really a spoiler, but it might be for some people. It's something that was in the comics, and I think even Natalie Portman was pretty specific about this within most of her interviews, so I don't think it's really a spoiler, but something about her character in the movie, that she does have cancer. It's revealed very early on in the film, and that story arc for Jane Foster I thought was pretty interesting. I actually liked the way they handled those scenes specifically, not some stuff around it, but those scenes specifically, I liked how they handled it, and I liked how they handled her kind of way of dealing with it, and how she really just didn't want to go, and she wanted to, at least if she was going to go, she wanted to leave something behind that was impactful, whether it was in the science realm, or obviously we know she gets these Thor abilities later on in that sort of way. She wanted to do something so her death had meaning, you know what I mean? So that's one of their stories in this movie that I really enjoyed. I really like how they develop her character in this film, because obviously cancer is a really awful thing, and she knows she's probably not gonna have much time left, but she isn't quite sure. There's like kind of some hints that maybe she'll be okay, maybe she won't, and I really like how her character kind of deals with that. Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher was probably my favorite part of the movie. I'm a big fan of Christian Bale as an actor, obviously ever since The Dark Knight, and then moving on to seeing American Psycho. I think he's one of the best actors of our time, and he just was incredible in this role. You could barely tell it's even him because of all the makeup and such, but the way he just portrays his character is just so creepy and interesting, and the character has a cool design, and the way he fights is really interesting. It kind of like phases into objects, like he can just phase underground and just kind of like disappear for a little bit and then come out of some random other place. He has these creatures that he uses, and he can like control them and make them do whatever he wants. He has this really cool sword. He's a really cool villain. I really liked him in this movie. There's some bad things about him that I will talk about in the negatives, but as a whole, I'm just glad he exists in this movie because Christian Bale did an incredible job as this villain. Valkyrie and Korg are fun side characters as always, and they get a lot more screen time in this movie than they did in Thor Ragnarok. Actually, I don't know. Did they have more screen time? Probably equal screen time as Thor Ragnarok, but it was just nice to see them again because they have a lot of fun moments here. I do think they were actually even better in this movie than they were in Thor Ragnarok, so that's definitely a plus. And it was cool to see all the gods and like further mythology in this movie compared to what we would see in other Thor movies, because it makes sense that you would want to cover stuff like that in a Thor movie, but the other ones didn't really go in depth with it as much, and this one really did. I mean, we get to meet Zeus, and that was really cool. And without spoiling anything, I think we're going to be seeing more of that type of stuff later on in future Thor movies, so that is pretty exciting. And lastly, there were some funny moments. Like, I did laugh a couple times. Like, there was this ongoing joke about these goats in this movie that I don't think anyone else laughed at but me. I maybe just have stupid humor, I don't know, but there was some funny stuff about that. I laughed. I don't know. And there's some other stuff, just little quips here and there that I think were funny enough. Like, it made me giggle. I was never laughing out loud like crazy, except for one scene. But there was some stuff that I at least felt like was decent comedy. But getting into the negatives, in regards to the comedy, there was a massive problem with the comedy in this movie. Simply the fact that there was just too much of it. I'm not really the type of person to have a big issue with comedy not being funny, because comedy is subjective. Of course, not everything is going to make me laugh. As long as it makes someone else laugh, then it worked. But my issue was not that the comedy wasn't all funny. My issue was that it was slapstick humor that felt so forced and was shoved into way too much of this movie, and this movie had a lot of other very serious topics going on, so the comedy just didn't fit well with those serious topics. And those serious topics obviously have to do with Jane Foster having cancer and Gore the God Butcher's backstory. It's a very tragic backstory, and he's going out to kill all these gods, and he kills a bunch of people, and they kind of just gloss over that and don't really show much about what actually happened, just because they just want to spend more time making humorous jokes with Thor and whatever. Like, they do so much comedy in this movie, and Ragnarok did as well, and I had a big issue with that in Ragnarok too, but at least Ragnarok didn't have like a gajillion serious things going on. It had some, but not nearly as much as this movie, to the point where the comedy felt like it fit more in that one, whereas here I was feeling like the whole time you could make this more serious, and I think it would actually work very well. Like, I think you could have a really serious story here, and I know the reason why this is the case, right? I've noticed this with the MCU. The more grounded and gritty stories tend to be more serious. Like, they tend to make those more serious. Like, for example, Captain America the Winter Soldier, or even go outside of the MCU and you go to like other superhero movies like Logan, or you go to the Batman or Dark Knight. They try to make these more grounded and gritty stories serious without any comedy. Maybe like a little bit of comedy here and there, but mostly without comedy. They don't ever do that slapstick humor type stuff at all. But then when you have movies that it's like, a very out there thing, like you have characters in other universes or other planets, or you have like, gods and all this stuff going on, like what you see in Thor, and they just can't fathom making a story like that serious, because they probably assume people would just not be into that, because they would think, oh, it's already so goofy, so why should we take it serious? No one's going to be able to take Thor seriously, so why should we take it seriously? And I don't think that's a good philosophy to have, and I really do think that's what they think, and that's why the Thor movies, that's why the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, that's why these movies have so much humor in them, because they know people aren't going to take them seriously otherwise, which I just don't think is true. To be fair though, Guardians of the Galaxy has a lot of humor, but they mix their humor very well with their serious moments. Like, they never let that stuff mix with each other. But here, I just didn't feel that way. You would have this really serious moment where, Jane is dealing with the fact that she has cancer, and the next scene there's some slapstick joke. And the comedy isn't really like organic comedy either. I always make this example because Logan is, I think, one of the funniest comic book movies ever, yet there's not any bit of slapstick humor there. It's all organic humor, just because some of the stuff that happens just happens to be kind of funny. So you would think like, oh, how could it possibly have that much humor? But it just kind of does. Like, there's just a lot of moments in that movie that make me laugh because it's just organic. It's just organic stuff, like Logan telling the girl to shut the fuck up. Like, it's funny. It just comes across as funny. It's not meant to be slapstick humor that just doesn't feel like something those characters would say in that moment. It doesn't make them feel cartoonish. You know what I mean? Sounds like I'm nitpicking, but I think I've been hearing this complaint from a lot of people. It's just, you're putting too much comedy in this movie, and it makes it hard to take moments that are supposed to be serious, because I'm honestly just waiting for something funny to happen, because I'm just kind of conditioned to feel that way in this movie. You know what I mean? Other things I didn't like about this movie, I didn't like how Jane got the Thor powers. I actually really didn't like how they handled that, because they completely skipped over it as a way to make it like a cool reveal for us, which they already showed the reveal in the trailer, so it wasn't really like a cool reveal, and we already knew it was coming anyways. But I kind of wish they showed her like dealing with the powers at first, and like seeing how she was able to learn them, because I don't believe that she can just grab the hammer and then be like a pro with it in just a second. Like, how? I don't know. Like, it just almost felt cheap in that way. Like, why can't she like get the powers and then kind of like have at least 10 to 15 minutes of screen time of her just like trying to get a grasp of it, trying to learn it. At least as the movie's going along, maybe she's trying to learn how to do it, because there's like not a single bit of learning curve for this character in terms of how she is Thor. And I don't know if that's because Mjolnir's doing all the work, I don't know, but like, why is she just so perfect with it? I just felt like it was a little odd. I like seeing characters kind of getting some time to grow within themselves, like Spider-Man, for example. I like how Spider-Man in Homecoming, he was just such a screw up. I mean, like, he didn't do anything right pretty much. He took a while until he can actually get a hang of things, and even in No Way Home, I mean, he's still screwing things up, but Jane just like, she just gets it all right away. I'm like, okay, what? The only thing she doesn't get is finding a cool catchphrase or something. They have like a whole joke with that, which was, I guess, a decent little gag in the movie, but I just wish she had some time to develop the powers and kind of learn them a little bit, so it would feel more earned and feel more satisfying in the end, because I don't think it's very satisfying when a character who we haven't seen in like 8 years, by the way, she just, boom, she's great with these powers automatically. It just felt a little cheap. When I saw her in the trailers as Mighty Thor, I thought she was gonna already have those powers for like a couple months at that time or something. Like, I assumed she had it for a while. I didn't think she just randomly got it and then like a couple hours later she's like defeating enemies like it's nothing. I don't know. It just, to me, it just made it feel cheap, and I think it would have been cool to see this character kind of learn the powers over time. Sure, you would have to extend the length of the movie a little bit, but the movie was already pretty short as is, so who cares? Make it 10 minutes longer and just have her actually spend some time learning it, which is another negative I have for the movie. The movie was a little too fast, a little bit too fast. It did not give any time to let things breathe. It definitely was rushed. They could have made it longer. I've been feeling this way about a lot of recent MCU movies, I feel, other than maybe Spider-Man No Way Home. Just, you gotta make these movies longer. Look at The Batman. The Batman was a perfect example of a movie that took its time and was able to tell an incredible story because it was the length that it needed to be. And I don't think you have to forcefully make movies longer, but if you have a lot of stuff going on, which this movie does, there's so much happening in this movie, you have to make it longer. You just have to. And they unfortunately made it a bit shorter, so it does feel like a lot of things are rushed in this movie. And the last thing I want to talk about for negatives is that the action, although I loved a lot of the action, there was a lot of cool fight scenes, especially with gore. Anything with gore was pretty cool. But there was almost too much CGI being used. Like, I get there's a lot of CGI elements to this movie. Obviously, they're using a lot of things that require CGI to be used. But, like, I would like to have seen maybe, like, a fight between Thor and Gore that was more grounded and felt more like it, you know, it felt like I was watching, like, a video game cutscene at some points. The CGI was great, but I didn't want to see that much of it. I kind of just wanted to see more hand-to-hand combat type stuff, like the type of stuff you see in like Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi had a lot of that, and I thought that was great. I would have hoped to see a little bit more of that. I know this is Thor, obviously Thor's got crazy stuff, so it's hard to do that, but it would have been nice to at least have seen just, you know, a little bit more hand-to-hand, like real stuff where you don't feel like you're just watching some, you know, work an animator put together. So I'm going to give you guys my rating out of 10. And then, of course, I'm going to go on to spoilers and talk about some spoiler stuff and my thoughts on those things. My rating is going to be a 7.5 out of 10. So that I thought was a pretty good rating to give this because, like I said, there's enough about it that I didn't like to keep it out of being an 8 out of 10 or definitely not a 9 out of 10. But I don't think I enjoyed my time so much watching this. I really had fun watching this movie. I think it is a fun movie. It just has a lot of issues with the story, and unfortunately that brings it down from being a top tier MCU movie. And if I was rating on like a tier list, it'd probably be like a B or a C tier, maybe somewhere in between that. I don't know. So yeah, 7.5 out of 10. Now when it comes to spoiler stuff, again, if you haven't seen the movie, don't watch this part. Jane's death, I liked, and I was glad they did that because I'm always the type of person who feels like MCU needs more stakes, so we actually should have some character deaths. And I was glad they did it, but I almost don't like how they did it, mainly because of everything that came before it. Because the movie was so comedic, because the movie already had two characters die, but not really die. Like, they had two moments where, you know, obviously if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Korg, you thought died for a second, and then like, oh no, he's still alive. And then Valkyrie, I guess makes sense why she didn't die there, but the way they filmed it, I was like, oh no, she's definitely dead. But no, she's fine. And so when they were doing this to Jane, I was like, they're not killing her. They're gonna do some shit, and she's gonna come back, and she's gonna be fine. So the moment felt a little bit cheaper because of that, because I was just expecting her to be fine. I was also expecting there to be some sort of a joke at some point because of how much comedy was in this movie. So it was hard for me to really just take it seriously, even though it was a serious moment. It was definitely the most serious moment of the movie. And then the post-credit scene has Jane in this, like, the Valhalla place where the people, the Asgardians go or whatever. And it says Thor will return. I don't know if they're referring to Thor as in Jane Thor, because it was right after her, you know, post-credit scene. So are they saying she's gonna return, which is stupid? Like, kill off a character and have them stay dead for once, damn it. Like, they don't do that in the MCU, apparently. Everyone has to come back, and I don't mind when they come back in like the multiversal sense. Like, I think the Loki show is kind of cool, how it's like a different timeline version of Loki. Like, that's fine. But like, you gotta learn to just keep characters dead, and I think that was a really fitting death. She sacrificed herself, which she successfully did, by the way. She had a really cool ending there. Just leave her dead, let her rest. But I feel like she's gonna come back, so I feel like that moment was a little bit cheaper because of that. I really liked Thor getting a daughter, or, you know, niece, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but Gore's daughter, as he was able to bring her back. And then of course Gore died because of the infection from the sword. And I really like how, you know, Thor was taking her under his wing. I don't like how she was able to lift Stormbreaker though, because like, why is every single fucking person like worthy now? I thought it was such a unique thing how like Thor was one of the only people who can like lift Mjolnir and of course Stormbreaker up. And then, you know, Cap, of course, getting it was fine. Obviously, Jane, I'm sure it works. She's obviously doing a lot of great things out there, so it makes sense why she'd be worthy. But, like, I feel like they just keep making characters worthy now. Like, everyone's just worthy. I don't know. There's just too many people who are worthy. And, like, this little kid's being worthy now. She's, like, 10. Like, what do you mean she's worthy? I don't know. It's okay. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens with that. I just really liked how he has a daughter now, because I feel like that's kind of cool what they can do with them. They can do some sort of a father-daughter story in Thor 5, which I'm always all about those stories, and they'll probably be fighting the gods because, of course, with the other post-credit scene, Zeus seemed to be, like, recruiting Hercules to basically hunt superheroes on Earth, it seemed. That's what it seemed like they were doing. I'm not sure exactly what they're building up, but I think that's what they're building up for Thor 5, and I do think that's kind of interesting. So, yeah, that's all I really want to talk about for the spoilers. Not too much other than that. Yeah. I thought it was a good movie. I just don't think it was nearly as good as I was hoping, obviously, but it is what it is. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.